turn this little recording thing on, and we'll see whether it works. I don't know where we've got to put these things, but as soon as I find out, I'm going to let everybody know. And if you miss one, we should have them recorded and stored somewhere that you can go look. I'm not sure whether they're going to put it on Facebook or one of the church sites or what, but we'll find out if it works, because I we'll see, we'll see. So anyway, so our first lesson on Daniel, and I wanted to introduce the teacher that's really behind all this, Tom Bradford. Tom runs it used to be a small congregation down near Orlando, Florida. It's a messianic congregation. I want to let everybody know exactly what that was. We've spoken about it before, but I want to make sure everybody's got an idea of what this is. That we're not talking about something out of left field here. This congregation is a congregation that they have a lot of Messianic Jews there. A Messianic Jew is a Jew that has realized that the Messiah has already been and has accepted him as the Messiah outlined in his own scripture in the Jewish Tanakh. So a Messianic Jew is a Jew that is a believer in Messiah, in Jesus. Also, we have a lot of Gentiles like us that are in a movement called the Hebrew Roots movement. It is a movement that believes that the Old Testament is real. It has impact on us today. It has impact on the New Testament. Um, and there are a lot of different kinds of Hebrew roots folks. Some of them are a little bit out from left field. Um, they remind me a lot of the Pharisees that Jesus hammered. So there can be a lot of odd people out there, but Tom Bradford is not one of those. Tom is a former Fortune 500 Fortune 500 company executive. He was way on up there in a country. I think it was DuPont. I don't remember which company he was an executive in, but um, after he began to get older, he began to take his religion a little more seriously, and he's left the corporate world and devoted himself to serious study of the Hebrew, the Hebrew language, and some in the Greek. He does do Greek a little bit, but he's mostly Hebrew, and he has truly devoted himself to ancient Israel and ancient Near East history. He is he is a phenomenon in the historical data that we have collected on the very early Middle East, and especially Israel. Um, I put his website link in the email that comes to you, and you can go look at it. His lessons are in there, and we're going to be using those as kind of our background here uh, to base the study of Daniel on. Um, so if you don't have that link, it should be in the email. It's just Torah Class, one word, torahclass.com. And once you get there, you can see all of his lessons. If you want to start looking at others, feel free. Um, I always listen to the lessons just before I teach, just to get them back in my head. I've been through Daniel a couple of times with Tom and his lessons. But I'm an auditory learner. I learn better when I hear. But also, you have on that same page where the lesson plays, you can download the actual transcript to print it out. I've made me made me a notebook here of the lessons where I've got them here, and I keep my notes in here too. So um, if you have any trouble with that, let me know. Let me know if you're in church on Sunday, or if you send me an email. Just let me know if you're having trouble with that, and I'll give you a hand with it. But um, the first lesson that we'd like to look at today, or any questions on Tom Bradford or his group down there that we're going to kind of be using as our guide. Any questions or concerns? If you have any concerns, feel free. And remember, always remember that if you have questions, speak up. Speak right up. I don't mind being interrupted. I had 6 kids. My life was an interruption. So speak up with your questions. Just stop me and speak up with those questions. Do not be afraid to ask a question, because I might have misspoken. Feel free to correct me, please. If you have a question about anything I say, this class is an open discussion here, and I got to tell you, even though some of you may not think so, I am a child in the Old Testament. I really feel like a child looking at the Old Testament, and it truly scares me sometimes when I look at this and think, why didn't I know that? So do not feel that I know it all here, for goodness sakes. So ask questions if they come anytime. Jump in and ask me. Um, so our first lesson, uh, I'm going to combine most of the lessons, because if you look the lessons on Daniel's, there's 36 lessons on Daniel, and we don't want to spend 36 weeks on Daniel. So I'm going to combine some of them as I can and try and keep them to the chapter. So we'll take chapter 1 next week, and I think chapter 1 is 3 lessons in the series. So I'll send the list of lessons out in the email, and you can go to the Torah class and listen to those lessons if you want to, or print them out and read them. I find listening to them better, but I print them out so I can keep notes on them and know what to say. So anyway, let's take off with lessons 1 and 2 on the introduction to Daniel. And if you listen to Tom's introduction, this is where his knowledge of the history of the time we're in and the history of the literature, it really shines. And like I said, I'm just a child compared to him, but I'm going to go ahead and give it a shot here. Uh, Tom starts out. He doesn't have a real high opinion of of a lot of the theology that we have floating around these days, and it all kind of falls back to, it goes back further than this, but when in lesson 1 he goes back to the Enlightenment period, where around the French Revolution, that period of time, where science really began to catch on fire, and these new elite intellectual types kind of looked down on religion, because they were discovering things with this new scientific method, by the way, that was developed by 2 or 3 Christians. The scientific method was developed by some very devoted Christians, because they wanted to explain God's order in the world. They knew that God made the world with order. Therefore, we should be able to explain things in an orderly manner, and that's where the scientific method came from. Of course, just like everything else, humans kind of took it sideways, and there we go. Uh, but in order for the church to kind of keep relevant, and you've heard how many times have we heard that these days? In order for the church to keep relevant, they began to apply the scientific method to the Bible, which is just wrong in every conceivable fashion. The scientific method was developed to explain what we call empirical matters. Empirical means you can touch it, you can taste it, you can see it, you can feel it. Things that are of the earth. The scientific method was made to explain those things and to apply it to a spiritual that is just wrong. You cannot do that. But the church thought, well, we'll give it a try because it'll make us relevant and we can continue to grow. Uh, and from that, systematic theology was born. Uh, it is a it is an idea that we can we can explain the Bible by systems, just like we do biology or paleontology or any of the sciences. The sciences are based on systems because that's how God created the world, in an orderly system. God doesn't act in an orderly system. God acts in patterns. And you have to understand that God can't be put in a box called a system. It just doesn't fit. He doesn't fit. But in order to remain relevant, the church has developed systematic theology, and that's, if you have been to seminary, you have been through systematic theology. That's the basis of most of our major theological systems today, is systematic theology. And Tom is not a fan. I used to look at systematic theology as the know all end all, but I, I'm not as he is pretty he is pretty far against it. I think it has some use, but yeah, the more I listen to Tom, the more I I lose faith in it. But anyway, systematic theology, one of the main things, and this is a beautiful illustration of how the Bible does not fit a system. This is a quote, or this fellow E.P. Sanders is one was he just passed in 2022. E.P. Sanders is one of the leading theologians in the world these days. He, like I said, he just passed in 2022. He actually taught at Duke University in the late 90s and early 2000s, I believe. So he taught over at Duke, and he was a professor of philosophy and religion over there at Duke. And he was asked a question at a conference in the late 90s, and I'm going to read the question here. This was from the Journal of Philosophy and Scripture conference, and like I said, it was in like the late 90s somewhere. And the moderator asked EP a question. In your work, you emphasize the non-systemacy of Paul's thought. He's talking about the Apostle Paul. It is undeniable that Paul is not trying to construct a philosophy or theology that would be doctrinal. In other words, Paul's not trying to put together some kind of set of doctrines or some system. He's addressing specific concerns, and sometimes his answers seem to contradict each other. I wonder if that non-systemacy will always end up being a tough spot for those who do want to appropriate a Pauline message or a Pauline program into a philosophical or even a theological system. Now, what this character is trying to say, if you don't speak university, he's trying to say that when you really read Paul, Paul doesn't fit any kind of doctrine that you're trying to put together. If you're trying to together an organized doctrine based on Paul's writing, all of Paul's writings, you're going to have trouble. And that is a common theme in theology when they're trying to study Paul. So EP says, and you know, he said, I wonder if it's a tough spot for those who do want to appropriate Paul into some kind of theology. He's wondering whether it's tough on these guys, and EP says it doesn't slow them down a bit because they take parts. The great thing about saying that you accept a figure or that you accept a text, for example, the modern fundamentalists who say that they accept the entire Bible, is that you can choose which bits and pieces you want to make use of and ignore the bits and pieces you don't want to make use of. So that's the way it is with appropriating Paul. I can say that I accept the entire Paul while only taking bits of Paul. I'm sure that the Lutheran theologians of the post-Reformation period thought that they were doing justice to the whole Paul, but they're leaving out such important things as sacramentalism and mysticism and so on, which are part of the whole Paul. So you can pretend to do it, and yet you do not actually do it. That's E.P. Sanders saying you can't put all of Paul's writing in some kind of organized theology. It won't fit. And that is what we see with this movement of systematic theology. And that's one of the things that we're going to see happens in Daniel, especially Daniel, because this is the point of all of this systematic theology, is that Daniel and Revelation have been tried. They're doing exactly what EP says. They have taken bits of Daniel and bits of Revelation and fit them into their theology instead of taking Daniel and building a theology from it. So we go, and this is the important part. Daniel is a hugely controversial book, and most of you have seen this before. This is a commentary on Song of Songs, Ruth, Esther, Jonah, and Daniel. It's written by Robert Alter. He's a very highly respected Old Testament scholar, very knowledgeable about ancient Hebrew. He does beautiful translations. I have his translation of um, Samuel, Kings, Joshua, Judges, and I also have his recent translation of Genesis. It's a really, really beautiful translation. However, let's take a look at his introduction to Daniel. It says, now remember, Daniel was written by Daniel in the Babylonian captivity. Daniel was taken by Babylon, and Daniel prophesied during his captivity in Babylon. That's around 600 or so BC. And Daniel prophesied about the Babylonian Empire being overthrown by the Medes and the Persians, being overthrown by the Greeks, and being overthrown eventually by the Romans, and then turning into something that we haven't even seen yet. So Daniel prophesied all that from Babylon. That poses a problem to these systematic folks because they don't believe in prophecy. So as Alter says here, whereas the dating of most biblical books is no more than a series of rough approximation, often hotly debated by scholars, it is almost certain that the second half of Daniel was written between 167 and 165 BC, because it refers in detail to a persecution initiated by Antiochus Epiphanes and his suppression of the temple cult in those years, and to no subsequent event. Given this late date, it is not surprising that Daniel more closely resembles the apocalyptic texts of the Apocrypha and of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So he's saying Daniel could not have been written during the Babylonian exile because Daniel couldn't possibly know about Antiochus Epiphanes, much less the Medes and Persians. How could he know that? How could he know that? And there's a lot. If you ever pick up a study Bible, there's the Ryrie's Inductive Study Bible. Check Daniel and see when that Bible says Daniel was written. If it says 160, 170 BC, that study Bible and those authors do not believe in prophecy. They do not believe in prophecy. So be careful. Like I've said before, Alter beautifully translates, but his commentary, I don't trust it. I don't trust it because he doesn't believe in prophecy. Doesn't believe in angels. Doesn't believe in the supernatural. He does not believe in it. Daniel is a great bookmark for seeing whether some theologian believes in prophecy and the supernatural and angels and the whole Bible. Now, the problem that this introduces is that Alter and people like him that believe in systematic theology believe that Daniel was written by a historian in the time of Antiochus Epiphanes and just took all of the history from Babylon all the way down to Antiochus Epiphanes and made up the story of Nebuchadnezzar, mixing in historic events, but made up the story of Nebuchadnezzar's dream statue, the prophecies of Daniel, made up Daniel in the lion's den, made up uh, the three Hebrew youths that were thrown in the fiery furnace. He made all that stuff up, a hoax, and a lot of people fell for the hoax, right? Well, there's one important problem with that. If you turn over to Matthew 24, and this is what we've got to be careful with. If you turn over to Matthew 24, verse 15, this is Jesus at this point is now prophesying. So Jesus is talking about the destruction of the temple and the coming of the end of the age. And in verse 15, Jesus says, "So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet of Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains." So in this storybook account from Daniel, Jesus got fooled too. Jesus thought it was prophecy also. That makes a big difference in the way you look at Daniel. If Daniel was made up, Jesus got fooled. There's a problem there. There's a real problem there. So be very careful when you read the introduction to Daniel. If somebody is saying that it was written in the 100s BC, they do not believe that Daniel was writing prophecy about future events, and they also believed that Jesus got fooled by it. And that's a big, big problem. That is a big problem. Also in Daniel, in the 9th chapter of Daniel, there's another, and we'll open up Daniel a little bit. In the 9th chapter of Daniel, this is the 70 weeks prophecy of Daniel, and we're going to spend a bunch of time on the 70 weeks of Daniel. But Daniel prophesies in these 70 weeks, he says, and after 62 weeks, an anointed one, and you know that means Messiah, after 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off and shall have nothing, and the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and in the end there will be war. And this is an interesting thing here, because the people that like numbers have worked out from
What
yeah
Norm? What
yes
verse was that?
I'm sorry.
What verse? What verse?
I didn't say the verse, did I? Daniel chapter 9. This is in the 70 weeks paragraph, starting with verse 24. I read verse 26.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I don't know why you couldn't see it. It's right here. So the people that like numbers went and looked at these numbers that Daniel gave. In 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off, and said, okay, let's figure this out, because we know Babylon. Babylon's history is fairly well known. And this fellow, Michael Rednick, had gone through and figured all this stuff out. And listen to what he wrote. There will be a period of 7 weeks of years. 49 years. This is very common when you see in Old Testament prophecy, when you see them talking about weeks, 99 times out of 100 they're talking about weeks of years. So that's 49 years, followed by 62 weeks of years, or 483 years, from the decree. That was when Cyrus told the Hebrews to go back. And we're skipping a lot in that 70 weeks paragraph there, Becky. If you read that, that's where all these numbers are coming from.
Yeah, I by mistake I thought I had Daniel bookmarked, but I was in Hosea.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, there's a good story with that one too. Maybe I'll remember it. The 7 weeks period, 49 years, pertains to the time it actually took from the issue of the decree. Remember, this is when Cyrus told the Hebrews they could go back. The decree until the restoration of Jerusalem. They rebuilt Jerusalem. Remember, the Babylonians destroyed it. The Persians let them go back and rebuild. The total of 483 years, 69 weeks, should be calculated as a specific biblical and prophetic years of 360 days each. The Hebrew calendar is based on 360 days per year. It's always been that way. I think even their calendar now is based on 360 days. That's why it kind of rotates a little bit, and they add an extra day or a week here and there. You should hear a Hebrew talk about calendars. The starting point of the prophecy would have begun on the 1st of Nisan, that's March 5th, 444 BC. That's back in Babylon, followed by 69 weeks of 360-day years, or 173,880 days, and cumulated on Nisan the 10th, March 30th. You ready for this? 33 AD. 33 AD. Strike a bell with anybody? That is the date of Messiah's triumphant entry. That's Palm Sunday. That's Palm Sunday, 33 AD. The, that's what the numbers add up to. That's scary. That's scary prophecy there. Daniel, in his 70 weeks prophecy, predicted Messiah's triumphal entry and his eventual death. Because remember, he said, an anointed one, Messiah, shall be cut off and shall have nothing. That's what he's talking about, is Jesus, the Messiah's cut off. That verse right there causes a lot of trouble in Judaism. A lot of trouble. Because they can't, because look at the other end. A prince who is to come shall destroy the city and its sanctuary. There's nothing else there but 70 AD. The Romans went in and destroyed the city and the sanctuary, and it was the Roman general who happened to be the emperor's son that would make him a prince. Antiochus Epiphanes was prince. That's the Jews have a lot of trouble with that verse, because that shines the light on one time and one time only in history, when 70 AD the Romans destroyed the temple again in Jerusalem. That is prophecy, and we cannot get around that. Daniel either wrote about prophecy or he fooled the Son of Man, the Son of God. He either fooled him, one or the other. That's all there is to it. So, what are we looking at now? Let's see. Where am I here? Let me catch up here. There's a lot of paper. Daniel, we're going to start in chapter 1 in Daniel, and very soon we're going to read about Daniel's dream statue, the giant statue that scared the living daylights out of Nebuchadnezzar. The head of gold, the chest and arms of silver, the belly of brass, and the legs of iron, and finally the mystery, the feet of iron and clay. This is something that I want you to start thinking of, because this one is going to be front and center. This one's going to be front and center. I have not seen Daniel's dream statue called this before, but it makes sense to me that dream statue of Nebuchadnezzar was the starting of the time of the Gentiles. Now we read in Romans 11. We'll go back to Romans 11. This is Paul, the one that everybody takes pieces of and shops around. When we read in Romans 11 talks about the remnant of Israel. Romans 11 is a tough verse for those people that think that the church substitutes for Israel. Romans 11 is a problem for them. But Romans 11, we skip down to verse 25, Becky. I remembered this time. Romans 11, verse 25. Lest you be wise in your own sight, I do not want you to be unaware of this mystery, brothers. A partial pardoning has come upon Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. A partial hardening will be upon Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. Luke also mentions this hardening. Let me see if I can find this. Yeah. In Luke chapter 21, 24, verse 24, some will fall by the edge of the sword, others will be carried unto all the countries of the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled down by the Gentiles until the age of the Gentiles has run its course. I can't make Nebuchadnezzar's dream statue, starting with Nebuchadnezzar and going all the way to that feet and toes of clay and iron. I can't make that anything but the time of the Gentiles that Jesus was talking about in Luke and Paul is talking about in Romans 11. And when we're talking about the time of the Gentiles coming to the end, that's when we're talking about the end. Capital D, capital E, N. When the end comes. Because Paul says it and Jesus says it. To the time of the Gentiles has been fulfilled. I cannot make that dream statue any way but fit that the time of the Gentiles started with Nebuchadnezzar and it ends with those feet of iron and clay. And I wish Jeff were here because he would pipe up and say some things because Jeff is way above me in prophecy. But hopefully he'll be here next week. So as you start looking at Daniel, you're going to hit that dream statue pretty quick. And I want you to start thinking about the time of the Gentiles and how that prophecy of Nebuchadnezzar, and you got to look, it's in Zechariah. It's in Zechariah, I believe. All right, it's either in Zechariah or Jeremiah, where God specifically turns the rule of, he calls it the world, turns the rule of the world away from the Jews and to specifically Nebuchadnezzar. And I'll have that verse when we hit that in Daniel 2. But when you look at that prophecy in either Zechariah or Jeremiah, one or the other, I can't remember right now, but God says that Nebuchadnezzar will, for 3 generations, his son, and his grandson, will rule as God's appointed agent over the entire world. And I cannot get my mind off of that was when God started the time of the Gentiles. He took Israel, who was in apostasy, and he basically turned his back on them and put the rule of the world into the hands of the Gentiles because they weren't doing their job. They weren't doing their job. So focus your mind as we go into Daniel on that dream statue, because I think it's a hugely overlooked image of basically the history from Nebuchadnezzar to the end. I think that dream statue is a history from Nebuchadnezzar to the end, and what those feet and toes of iron and clay are, I got no idea. Maybe we can come up with what it is. But start focusing your mind. We will take Daniel chapter 1 next week, and we will go through that. And we'll specifically go through Daniel chapter 1 in order. So go ahead and start reading chapter 1 of Daniel take a look at the classes, bring your questions, that you've got. But chapter 1 of Daniel next week. All right.
Okay.
Are there any questions, Becky?
I said, okay, we'll do.
All right. Any questions on this kind of introduction? Like I said, Tom does a lot better job than me. Go listen to that. But any questions on that introduction, systematic theology, and how I don't like it much anymore?
No questions, but basically we need to read Daniel chapter 1 to prepare for next week. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am. And I believe,
Okay.
let me look. I think there are 3 lessons on Daniel chapter 1. Let me go look real quick.
Okay.
Daniel 1 continued. No, it's just 2. Wait. Yeah. Lesson 3 and lesson 4. Daniel chapter 1
Okay.
and Daniel chapter 1 continued. So
Okay.
two of his lessons, 3 and 4. But read Daniel 1. Read the chapter first and then listen to the lesson.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
Other than that, we'll be more normal class. Like I said, this introduction is way beyond me. I don't like this academic stuff. I like the Bible. So, Daniel chapter 1 next week. Any questions before we take off?
Oh, sounds good.
All right.
Have a good week,
Yep.
everybody.
Everybody.
Okay.
Have a great week, guys.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
See you
Thank
guys.
you. Have a great.